Welcome back to the MOOC course on qualitative research methods. My name is Aradhana Malik and I'm helping you with this course. We've discussed various aspects of qualitative research. We've talked about what qualitative research is. We've talked about strategies of inquiry. We had started talking about data collection and analysis methods, and we were specifically discussing the data collection and analysis methods for textual data. So last time we talked about the data for words, analyzing words, and today we are going to talk about analysis of chunks of words. So we will take the same discussion a little forward, and we will discuss how we can analyze words within their own context. We will talk about paragraphs, we'll talk about narratives, and we will talk about how these words can be analyzed within the context. So these words together create a context, and these contexts are represented in and through the language that we use to describe that context by way of words that we use in that particular language. So these are chunks of words, groups of words that appear together. Okay. Coding. Now what we do here is we code the data. Coding is a process that forces the researcher to make judgments about the meanings of contiguous blocks of text. So we read something and we are forced to see the chunks of word as building up a context. We are forced to make a judgment about what we see emerging out of the relationships of these words with each other, and that is what coding does. Coding asks us to focus our thoughts, to focus our judgment, to focus our interpretation of what we read as these collections of words, and come up with a single or with a very focused, very clear understanding of what it is that we are talking about, what it is that describes this collection of words. And the tasks in this are, how do we do coding? We've discussed coding a little bit in grounded theory earlier. So now we will discuss coding in greater detail. What happens in coding? The first step in coding is sampling. We need to find the most appropriate sample, the best representative of this whole ongoing volume of text that we have. So sampling is of utmost importance. The second step here is finding themes. We take a sample and we find what emerges. We take these blocks of text and we try to find out what is emerging out of these texts. The third step here is building code books. We try and understand, or we make a list of what these words indicate in terms of code books, and we had talked about code books even in the previous lecture, so I'm not going to go into detail about that. Then we mark the text with references from code books, and we use these marks or these marked texts. We use the information that we garner from these marked texts to build models, to construct models that relate to the theory that we are talking about. And then we test these models against empirical data. That is the whole process that we will be discussing. Okay. Sampling. Sampling is the identification of a corpus of texts followed by selection of the units of analysis within the texts that serve as representations of those texts. So we have a corpus, we have a large collection of texts, and we select the units of analysis within those large collections of texts, and we take those markers or those units, or we classify that portion of the text that represents the text that we are talking about as best as possible. So we draw it from there. Thematic units are chunks of texts that reflect a single theme. Simple to understand. Where the objective is to compare across texts, the units of analysis need to be non-overlapping. We cannot have two units of text that are overlapping. that indicate something similar. They need to be distinctly different. So where our object is to compare something, compare a phenomenon across text, the unit of analysis needs to be completely different. How do we find themes? Themes are abstract constructs that investigators identify before, during and after data collection. Why before? Because we needed direction for our data collection. Why during? Because we need to stay on track. And we observe, we have discussed how qualitative researchers are very closely connected with the environment that they study, as opposed to researchers who engage in quantitative research, or the objective research, as we say. So we are very closely connected to the objects of our research, and we understand and we acknowledge that we as researchers, our presence in the environment of the phenomenon that we are studying is very likely to influence the phenomenon that is being studied, and that in turn will affect what we get out of that study. That in turn will affect our observations, will affect how the environment behaves as a result of us being there, even though we are not participating, but just by being in that environment, the environment is affected and the environment behaves in a certain way. Then we take these themes. So these are abstract constructs that we identify before to guide our research, during the data collection to make sure that we are in tune, we are connected to the environment or to the phenomenon that we are studying, and to our goals from that study, and after data collection. So after we have collected our data, we try and we verify that the appropriateness of the data that we have collected in terms of the research question that we had asked. Sometimes we get sidetracked while collecting data. We say, okay, this also looks interesting, this also looks interesting. So we start collecting a whole lot of data that initially was not planned. However, we need to stay on track. So we try and check, and we go back and forth with the to the research question that we have asked. We go back and forth to the direction that we have taken, to the theme that we had hoped we would collect data on. So that is something that we do. The second thing that is likely to happen, or that does happen in such cases, is that during data collection or after the data has been collected, we realize that we could modify, or we realize the possibility of modification of the initial direction that we had taken. So we say, okay, we started out with this assumption, we started out with an idea in our minds, but in the process of collection of data and after having collected this data, we realize that this direction can be modified to include the data that we have collected and come up with something much more significant. Okay, so we need to continuously revise, modify, update our themes before, during and after data collection. Okay, the methods for this are grounded theory, which is in grounded theory, the finding of themes happens through line by line reading of the text while looking for processes, actions, assumptions and consequences. So we go line by line. We've discussed this in grounded theory, so I'm not going to go into it. Schematic analysis, we will talk about it. We look for metaphors, we look for repetitions of words and shifts in content. We look for abstract representations of the context that we are referring to. Okay, in content analysis, we look for keywords in context. We will talk about this as well. And we also use significant events. We use information that we gather during significant events as to find themes. So significant events actually act as markers for themes. So our themes can revolve around these significant events. For example, if we are trying to study the impact of say global warming on the availability of groundwater to farmers, So that's one thing. So when we are studying that, maybe in some year there was higher monsoon. Now that is an outcome of global warming. Then the amount of rainfall crossed all records, and or maybe in some year we are talking about these impacts, but then in some year maybe there was a drought. So these significant events help us find our themes, help us anchor our quest for data. Okay, then building code books. Now code books are organized lists of codes which are often in hierarchies. A good code book should include a detailed description of each code, inclusion and exclusion criteria, and exemplars of real text for each theme. Code books are aids to memory. So what we do is we build these code books. We write what the theme is and the characteristics of this theme. So, and these themes are arranged in a specific hierarchical list. What is more important, what comes next, etc. A good code book should include a detailed description of each code. Each code is described, what it includes, what describes it, what defines the code. It should also include the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So on what basis will we say that something belongs to this code, or this code has to be assigned to a particular aspect or event? On what basis will we say that this code has to be or this item does not belong to this code? So inclusion and exclusion criteria are very important, and exemplars of real text for each theme to help the reader understand, to help the interpreter understand how to use the code book effectively. Code books they serve as aids to memory. Okay, marking texts. Marking texts are assigning, or when we talk about marking texts, we assign codes to contiguous units of text. So we built our code book, then we take those codes and then we go back to the text and we try and connect whatever we have built in the code book to the text itself. The use of codes act as tags to mark off text in a corpus for later retrieval or indexing. Codes also act as values that are applied to fixed, non-overlapping units of analysis. Okay, so they act as tags and they act as values that are applied to fixed, non-overlapping units of analysis. They are judgments that we use to categorize and represent our data. Analyzing chunks of text. Now we move on to building conceptual models. We've coded our text, we know where each thing belongs, we know what themes are emerging. Now the time comes to take all that we have collected and build a model out of it. How do we do this? Conceptual models are theoretical models demonstrating links and relationships between concepts emerging out of the study. Various ways in which we can build these conceptual models are grounded theory. We've studied this, so we won't go into this. Schema analysis, visual display of concepts and models, classical content analysis, content dictionaries, analytic induction and Boolean tests, and ethnographic decision models. So we'll talk about each of these one by one. Grounded theory. Grounded theory is an iterative process by which the analyst becomes more and more grounded in the data and develops increasingly richer concepts and models of how the phenomenon being studied really works. Okay, so the analyst becomes more and more rooted, the analyst becomes more and more connected to the data, becomes more and more linked to the data, and develops increasingly richer concepts and models of how the phenomenon really works. Schema analysis, we've talked about grounded theory, so we are not going to discuss that today. Schema analysis, now it combines elements of the linguistic and sociological traditions based on the idea that people must use cognitive simplifications to help make sense of the complex information to which they are constantly exposed. They begin with a careful reading of verbatim texts and seek to discover and link themes into theoretical models, and they focus on the repetitiveness of associative linkages. Schema analysis really takes the elements of linguistic and sociological traditions, and it is based on the idea that people must be able to simplify whatever they see in their environments into schema or schemata. Schemata is the plural, schema is singular, so into different schemata that represent, or a schema is a picture that we form in our heads. It's our understanding, it's your understanding, it's my understanding of a particular phenomenon. How do I categorize it? Based on my understanding of the phenomenon in and through my past experiences, connected to my understanding, my interpretation, my study, the way I process the data. So all of this adds to the creation of a schema. Now it begins with a careful reading of verbatim texts and seeks to discover and link themes into theoretical models. So we see all this text and we've created all these themes, and then the next question is, how do these themes connect to each other? So we try and take whatever we have understood from these themes, about these themes, from the text, and we try and connect it into a theoretical model. It requires, or it rests on the repetitiveness of associative linkages. Okay. So next, classical content analysis. This comprises techniques for reducing text to a unit by variable matrix and analyzing that matrix quantitatively to test hypotheses. So it comprises of, it includes techniques that reduce the text to a unit by variable, and we'll just talk about this, and then we analyze that matrix quantitatively and then test our hypotheses, which is our beliefs about a particular phenomenon. To do this, we first select the sample of text, then we code each unit for each of the themes or variables in the code book, and the output of this is a unit by variable matrix that can be analyzed using a variety of statistical techniques. Okay. Content dictionaries are computer based general purpose content analysis lists or dictionaries. Okay. The process of building such dictionaries is that researchers assign words by hand to one or more categories according to a set of rules. So we have a set of rules, we go through the text and we say, okay, this category of words means this category of words, we take a collection of words, or we form categories and name those categories, and these names are given according to a set of rules. These rules are a part of a computer program that parses means breaks up new text, assigning words to categories. And we'll talk more about this when we discuss software, the role of software in qualitative research, or the role of computers, technology in qualitative research. Analytic induction and Boolean texts. Analytic induction is a formal, non-quantitative method for building up causal explanations from a close examination of cases. And the steps here is, it's a non-quantitative method, but it's a formal method for building up causal explanations from a close examination of texts. If then loop is a Boolean method. So the steps in this are, we first define a phenomenon that requires explanation and propose an explanation. Then we examine a case to see if the explanation fits. If it fits, then we examine another case. Then we see whether it fits. If it fits, then we examine another case. In the event that the case does not fit the definition or the explanation that we have given to the phenomenon, then we consider the rules of analytic induction and change the explanation or redefine the phenomenon to include whatever doesn't fit. Okay, so we go back and forth. So the two outcomes we have are, it fits or it doesn't fit. There is no middle ground, and that's what, that's where the Boolean reference comes from. It's either plus or minus, 1 or 2. Okay, 0 or 1. So it either fits or it does not fit, and if it doesn't fit, then we do something else. for it. Okay, so we change the rules of analytic induction. The last aspect that we are going to discuss in this is, or the last method of analysis of large chunks of data that we are going to talk about now, is ethnographic decision models. Ethnographic decision models are causal analyses that predict behavioral choices under specific choices. This comprises a series of nested if-then statements that link criteria and combinations of criteria to the behavior of interest. So, if X happens, then Y will happen. If the sun shines, the water in lakes will dry up. If the water dries up, the marine life will die. If the marine life dies, then so that is the way it happens. Alright, so it's a series of nested if-then statements that link criteria to the behavior of interest. The steps here are: number 1, researchers identify the decisions they want to explore and the alternatives that are available. So they find out what they want to do, and the alternatives that are available in order for them to do what they want to do. The second step is researchers conduct open-ended interviews to discover the criteria people use to select among alternatives. So they find out what kind of criteria we need to use to select, or what kind of criteria people use to select among these alternatives. The third one is they systematically collect data, preferably from a new group of people, about how each criterion applies or does not apply to a recent example of the behavior. So there is cross-checking. Maybe this group of people says that it fits or it applies, but another group of people says does not really, they don't really see that. So that's what they do. Data is used to build a preliminary model and test its post-predictive accuracy, and that is where, that is how then we take this data that has been verified, that has been checked with the people, the alternatives that are available, that has been, we find out from people how they are, the criteria they are using to select among alternatives, and then we build the preliminary model and then we test its accuracy in light of the work we have done. And that is all we have time for in this lecture. We will meet again with some more inputs on qualitative research. Thank you very much for listening.